Hello, everybody. This is Cassie Heron from Missoula CFAC, and I'm here with a couple other folks from CFAC.
Paul Hubbard.
Max Mellon. And so it's a little hard to tell if everyone can hear us, so I'm going to type in as well. So if those that can see but cannot hear, we can check. Tune in. Sorry.
Type in.
Yeah. And if anyone cannot hear us, I'm hoping. Bill. Okay, well, we'll get started. I'm going to run through a little bit of the technology first so everybody knows sort of how to gate if they want to participate. So any questions? We're going to run the webinar as a presentation. And so at any point you have questions or need a clarifying answer, please utilize the question and answer. Please use the question and answer box option down here. And so, right down here at the bottom right, actually maybe you can't see my pointer, you'll see a question and answer box. So just type it in and we'll have points as we go. And at the end, there will be time for a question and answer session. So please, if you could, save more in-depth questions for that time. And we'll go through how we can like that. This is also being recorded, and it's going to be posted on our website for later reference. So if no questions at this time, we'll go ahead and get started.
So just a little background on kind of the conception of the Ag Land Network. This is really kind of officially kicking it off right now. For the past several years, the Community Food and Agriculture Coalition has been working with Missoula County to conserve farmland, and really it's part of building a whole local food system. But we've done a lot of work, working with the city and county government of Missoula to try to better plan for working farms and ranches. So pretty isolated, and specific to Missoula County. And then the 2011 legislature came along, and you actually worked with us to defeat a bill that would have prevented local governments from even being able to ensure that new developments don't run through our working farm ranches. And so there was this great synergy from across the state. And really in every corner of the state, a lot of you and others, both people who just like to eat good food, people who like to see working farms on the land, and actually mostly from farms and ranchers themselves, out to defeat this bill. Hundreds of people were calling their representatives, and at the end of the day, we were successful. And that was over, but it seemed like there was this great opportunity for us to strengthen our capacity at the local level by working together, sharing resources, sharing our story about what was successful and what wasn't, in order to better plan for working farms and ranches in our own communities, and then also be much stronger future legislative sessions to have a strong voice for agriculture at future legislative sessions. So these 3 webinars are just the start. We hope it's an opportunity to share your knowledge and stories. We'll be making multiple pitches for you to participate and get in touch with us to lead this. And I'll also say more a little later about working together on a toolkit to empower citizens' voices in their local communities.
We'll just jump in here. Over the past month or so, I've talked to many of you, 30 or more, and from the input I gathered, this has been crucial in shaping the Ag Land Network. First, sorry about that, through a little bit of what we're going to talk about today. Did a little of the technology, and again, if you have any questions, just feel free to type those in. As I said, the input I've gathered from the survey over the past month or so has really helped us roll the Ag Land Network, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. is going to give us a background on the Montana Subdivision and Platting Act. Paul's going to give a few highlights from around the state, and then we're going to talk about upcoming webinars and open it up for questions. So I'll go right into the results. Just to give you sort of an overview, it's probably self-explanatory, but I thought it might help give us a little perspective as to where folks came from that spoke about ag loss in their communities. I think it's important many of the people I spoke with hailed from counties with the highest population concentration and the most intense population pressures, especially in recent decades.
And I would, to me, when I look at this map, I'm just struck by how much we have to gain by working together wherever possible, and again, just kind of sharing our stories and resources.
Okay. This is how Montana farmland across the state. Out of 30 people I spoke with, 21 recognized that agricultural loss was a problem and in a direct result to development pressure. And while there are other challenges to keeping land and agriculture, because of the overwhelming response due to development pressure, this is the issue that we're going to focus on and in this and in future webinars. Okay, we'll continue. All right. So, with development pressure being the overlying reason, these are sort of the underlying reasons why Montana is losing farmland, and economics was a major reason cited by folks. Continual production is often not viable in comparison to selling for development, as many folks said, and in many communities, locally produced foods often cannot compete with commodity food production. And economics was a lack of political will across the state. And this category included a couple of different responses from folks. One person said that don't want to feel trapped with zoning that keeps them in agriculture. And this anti-policy sentiment seemed to be a very, very popular response, many of you. And lack of political will also included responses where elected officials or local planners are not going to plan for ag if it means butting up against this voting constituency opposed to planning. The next prevalent observation was the lack of knowledge on the importance of farmland. People seem to think that lacking education and knowledge was helping to facilitate a loss of agricultural land and heritage. And this was either from lack of general information available or knowledge on local policies and how they plan for agriculture, if at all. It was also mentioned that people are not making the connection that food comes from the land and therefore we need to protect the land. Weak planning for agriculture was also noted as a facilitator for farmland loss, as was a waning interest in farming as a profession. The reasons varied, but sometimes this overlapped with the economics issue. What
we see and then what it means for the ag land network, it shows kind of the breadth of the different reasons, and of course there's no silver bullet. I think we'll all agree that this is a big complicated animal. What the ag land network can do is really focus on those middle three columns. How do we build a strong case to address that lacking political will, build a lot of public support, and therefore political momentum to better protect our agricultural heritage. And one of the ways we're going to do that is through improving knowledge, both educating our government officials, but largely through the citizen voice. How do we engage informed citizens in educating their government that we can do something about this in our communities, and we want to, and therefore implementing the planning policies that will get the job done. At a waning interest in farming, which 6 of you mentioned, I can speak to the Community Food and Agriculture Coalition runs a program to work with beginning farmers. And interestingly, there's overwhelming interest it seems like nobody wants to get started in agriculture, but really there's a number of barriers that it's difficult for some beginning farmers to get around. But I can tell you there's quite a bit of interest from the next generation of farmers and ranchers to get on the land and get started. So that's one of the reasons why we need to make sure we plan ahead this land base is available to them in future generations.
So the next I posed to people are achievements for agriculture across Montana, and there was a response to this question. Many folks said they weren't sure if they could cite a specific incident of achievement, but those that did respond mostly pointed to an increase in citizen engagement as an achievement. And whether this engagement is happening at a higher level with planning officials or smaller neighborhood scale, across the state, people are collaborating and coming together to make better planning decisions. There also be an increased popularity in farmers markets and support of a local food movement, which is certainly an achievement for ag. Funding for conservation was another achievement cited, and this referred mostly to an increase in funding for open space bonds. Increased development, while due to market factors, was also cited as a win for ag, as well as general increase in education through food shopping and additional land being put into conservation easements.
As far as the network's concerned, we hope to see the number of achievements in communities across Montana really go through the roof. And I think the secret ingredient to doing that is going to be citizen engagement. And that's really where we're going to focus our strategic attention, is how do we better engage citizens to really change the way our communities are planning ahead for agriculture and good food.
So finally, what resources they could think of that would help to empower their communities to better protect agriculture. And these responses were lumped into three main categories. And the overwhelming response from folks was that more education, data, and outreach regarding the importance of agriculture was desperately needed in their communities. And the education and data included many different responses, such as needing to know more statistics of acreage of farmland lost or locations of prime soils, that kind of information. The outreach component included various responses. A few people saw a need for networking between individuals in different sectors of the community. For example, networking between members of the ag community and the environmentalist community. Also a need for networking between planners and commissioners from one county to another to share their own experiences and strategies. Naturally, increase in incentives to farm would always help, and this response was geared primarily toward economic incentives. Stronger policy aimed towards precision planning for agriculture was cited as another resource. And this included policy tools such as strategies and funding for easements. Of these categories, it's important to note that many of you mentioned the need for models and examples of successful strategies in action. So whether this was data showing successful and ethical, viable farming models, or examples of how other communities are planning for agriculture, many felt that having knowledge of what's going on across the state would help empower the collective effort.
Yeah, this is my favorite slide of the research Cassie did through interviewing you all, really because your responses nail the purpose and function of the Ag Land Network, and that's to empower communities to implement better planning policies through education, data, and outreach in communities across the state. And really we can do that by sharing our resources, sharing our stories, and look for models that we can each use from one another or adapt to our own communities. So these webinars are one example of a way we can tell our stories to one another and share resources. For example, in the next webinar, we're going to address how to make agricultural land a hot topic in your communities. And you will have stories about what happened in your communities, what's been effective to build political momentum for conserved farmland, and what hasn't been so effective. So we would really love to hear from you what those stories are, and based on you be presenting that story in the next webinar. So if you don't mind taking a moment, if you have a story to tell about what's been effective in your community for making the farmland conservation a hot topic, if you can type it in this box, just let us know so that we can get in touch with you and plan ahead for the next webinar. That would be great. And if you prefer just to email us, just get in touch with us one way or another, and we'll make sure you can get in the next webinar of farmland a hot topic in your community. So another example of how our resources can be powerful by sharing them, the Kid Food and Agriculture Coalition spent almost a year researching the agricultural land to development in Missoula County. And we did a page report called Losing Ground. You can download it on our website. But more importantly, the piece of information, there's a single sentence in the whole report that we repeat over and over again. We beat it like a drum to make farmland a hot topic here. And that's simply that Missoula County lost 3 football fields of working farm and ranch land between 1986 and 2008. That's it. It's that image of 3 football fields of working farmland that's disappeared every single day for 25 years. Well, looking at that, how we came up with that single data point, when friends in Gallatin County asked me to come speak over there, I did a very quick search at the Gallatin County Department of Revenue data, and quickly came up with a statistic for them that they can either choose to use or not. They probably want to confirm this, but they lost 9 football fields of working farm and ranch land every single day between 2000 and 2010. So that's just an example of how Missoula County, we stumbled into this one way of doing this research and coming up with one statistic that's been really powerful for making a strong case here. And if that might work in another community in Montana, then that's fantastic, and we can really quickly do that. A whole year's worth of work and translate it into action in a single hour for you. Another example of how this network can empower communities through education and outreach is creating a kit, or a citizen's guide to land use and conserving farmland through planning. So what do citizens need to know to speak, to be effective with their voice in your community? And we want to really boil this down, because those of you who have been land use planning for a while, many of you have, you know that it's often a very complicated field and often full of landmines. But it's also very simple that politicians and local government respond to informed, passionate citizens. And so what do they really need to know to be effective with their voice and make sure that they're moving proper planning to protect working farms and ranches in their community? So we're going to plug the toolkit again later. It's another project that, just like any network project, we hope that you will want to participate in. It's going to be a joint effort, but that's another example of how the AgLand Network can be an important resource to us across the state.
So now we'll move into the Montana Subdivision and running that piece.
Yeah, I did show you this slide. This is not from the survey. This research done by the State of the Rockies and Colorado College, and it's actually done of all Montanans, a sample of all, reflecting the views of all Montanans. And just so we see that actually, while this group on this webinar obviously cares about farmland, we are far from alone in Montana. This research found that 70% of all Montanans identify as conservationists. That's the most of any Western state. 80% of all Montanans we can protect land and water and still have a strong economy. Well, it's very parallel to a lot of the work to ensure that farm and ranch land is conserved. And as we know, we need to protect farm and ranch land in order to have a strong economy. And lastly, 87% of us across the state think the loss of family farms and ranches is a serious problem. So this is something we really need to capitalize on. We don't, in a lot of ways, we don't need to go convince many people this is a problem. As this report shows, they already see it's a problem. We need to translate that into action. So I just wanted you to see that we're not on an island here. We've got statewide support to do this. So I want to introduce Sarah McMillan. She is a land use attorney, and she's done a lot of work with the Community Food and Agriculture Coalition here in Missoula County. One of the things she's done as an attorney is stand up to make sure that one community's growth policy, actually their neighborhood plan, was upheld. And a subdivision was approved in the city of Missoula, I think 2 years ago, maybe more than that, 4 years ago. And it didn't jive with the neighborhood plan they had put in place. And Sarah was able to, working with community, have the decision overturned. And so now that subdivision is no more. So please welcome Sarah McMillan, and she's going to walk us through the Subdivision and Platting Act and its relevance to us at Planning for Working Farms and Ranches in our local communities.
So I wanted to say, just to start with, that we have received a couple of questions, and we'll sort of address those at a later date. We're going to keep moving through the presentation, and we have received a couple of questions. So you can sending them in. We're not ignoring them. We're just responding to them. So I wanted to just start really basically with what the purpose of the Subdivision and Platting Act is. And I think to note here, it says to promote the public health, safety, and general welfare. And not only does that echo essentially local government's responsibility to its citizens, it also ties in, I think, well with that State of the Rockies report that Paul was talking about a minute ago. 77% of Montanans think that protecting farm and ranch land is part of protecting our public health and general welfare. That's a good tie-in right there, just to start with. But they also wanted to note that furtherance of that duty, the promoting public health, safety, and general welfare, the local government uses a list of review criteria provided in the Montana Subdivision and Platting Act. And they are to, in the review of any subdivision, they are required to look at these, I believe there are 8 primary review criteria. The first one is the impact on agriculture, and then come all these others, the local services, wildlife, and public health and safety. And I think a couple. First of all, there has been some effort to suggest that agriculture isn't to be treated the same way as the impacts on agriculture are not to be treated the same way as the impacts to wildlife or, say, public health and safety. And first of all, nothing in the statute suggests that agriculture is treated any differently. And second, the local government is required. This is an absolute statutory mandate that they look at that, and they certainly have the authority to deny, approve, or conditionally approve based on any single one of these criteria. I think a lot of local governments do have a tendency to sort of weigh balance, but it's understandable, but they have the authority to deny. You could, for example, say under public health and safety, if a subdivision is proposed with housing on a high-pressure gas line, so a single issue, public safety, that the county commissioners would have the authority to deny that subdivision based on that the impact of that single criteria. The same thing to the impacts to agriculture. I think another thing that has happened, and this happened last year, really in the 2011 legislature that you guys know about, The next slide. And that is that people look at what agriculture means and try to sort of interpret it in different ways. But it's really important to look at the testimony by the sponsor of the bill, and it says, I have here on the slide, that he felt there was a tragic intrusion on the agricultural land base of Montana, and he had seen that in his own county of Gallatin, where he said one has to drive but a short distance to see some of the best agricultural land covered by houses and subdivisions. So there's no question that impact to agriculture in the statute is intended to agricultural lands, not just current agricultural use. And it does happen that local governments never use that criteria. Most local governments have not used that criteria to deny a subdivision, but they do have that authority. And I think the more we insist on it and point them directly to the statute, the more likely they are to accept that as part of their not only authority but also responsibility. I think I have one more. Just briefly, and there's a whole lot more, of course, that could be covered, and I'm sure some of you are very well located in the Subdivision and Platting Act. But just briefly here, we wanted to sort of talk about how the process works, and it starts by the developer submitting a proposal, and the planning office will go through and make sure that it has all the necessary pieces that are required by statute. Only after that's completed does it go through to the next stage, which is agency review, where the developer will send the proposal to a number of agencies like Fish, Wildlife, and Parks here in Missoula, CFAC, a number of different agencies, the fire department, things like that. And the agencies then are going to comment on what kinds of impacts they see as being problematic, or say there are no impacts, so the issues that concern us. If it's okay at that point, then it gets moved on to the planning board and the local government, the elected officials. And at that stage is where citizens have the opportunity to participate. There are essentially public hearings, there may be more, but there will certainly be two if you're talking about a division in front of a planning board and then in front of, say, the county commissioners. And that's the opportunity to bring in more information, comment, to raise the issue of agriculture in front of your local government. With that, I'll be done. Okay.
So I just want to highlight a couple of things while we're on this slide. And those are the two lines that we have in red there. Because that's where the Community Food and Agriculture Coalition has gained a lot of traction at those 2 points with citizens' voices. We've now viewed 30 subdivisions for their impacts on agriculture, and we've done that through as an agency. Essentially, we began testifying on subdivisions on farmland during a public hearing. So it's already in front of the governing body, and our members began going and testifying in the public hearings and saying, look, this is an irreplaceable loss of farmland. There's nothing done to mitigate that impact. And the Missoula local government decided to invite us to become an agency, because even though, as Sarah showed, even though Missoula, like every other local government in Montana, has a mandate to consider the impacts on agriculture, they didn't know how to do it. So, in fact, repeatedly over the last 20, you see the line, this subdivision would result in the incremental loss of farmland. And that was it. That's where they said, okay, we've considered it, and now we're moving on. So when we began testifying in the public hearings, they said, you know what, we would really actually like your input earlier in the process. So would you mind becoming an agency so that you can provide your comments during agency review, and then the developer can actually what to do with that, and potentially make some revisions to the subdivision design. And so you'll see that I'm going to show you a subdivision in a minute here where we actually were able to influence that by working with the developer after we had submitted our agency review comments. But I want to highlight those two areas because I think in your communities across the state, those are some two really critical moments to be aware of. You could potentially organize a small group of people. Maybe there's an organization that would be able to become an agency by talking to their planning office, talking to their local government, and saying, hey, we're an adequate job here in considering the impacts to agriculture. We'd like to help. We'd like to work as an agency. We're organizing public input at the public hearing, and ideally both. So I want to take a look at 4 subs to see this on the ground. And basically what I want to illustrate is the Montana Subdivision and Platting Act in action in our communities, or in many cases, a lack of action. And there's a couple of themes here. One, that across Montana, the final decision ultimately comes down to the local governing political will and understanding of the Montana Subdivision and Platting Act. As Sarah mentioned before, there's not always an adequate understanding that an impact to agriculture alone, if unmitigated, is sufficient for denial of the subdivision altogether or to conditionally approve it in a way where the impact has been mitigated. And so those are 2 key pieces, the political will and the understanding, the education of our local government about the laws that are already in place and have actually been in place for over 30 years. And voices, the second common theme here is that citizens' voices can influence both the political will and the local government's understanding of the law. So here we are as birds at 20,000 feet looking down at Hamilton, Montana in the beautiful Bitterroot Valley. And this is a subdivision that happened recently in 2011, the biggest subdivision in Ravalli County history. So if you were thinking, hey, development's at a standstill, we need again this huge subdivision totaling 550 acres, as you can see, almost entirely farmland. It was approved this past year, creating, it's covering 396 acres. There's 550 dwelling units, as well as 4 commercial lots. Now, the planning board recommended denial, largely impacts to agriculture. There were other concerns as well, but the planning board gave the Ravalli County commissioners plenty of ground to deny this just based on the impacts to agriculture alone. The county commissioners, however, didn't get that way. I would say from following this in the newspapers, the political will and the lack of understanding of state law as the 2 key reasons why they just decided to approve it. And the mitigation they required for agriculture was twofold. One, the loss of farmland, almost 400 acres of farmland. To mitigate that, they required a 5-acre community garden. So to be the judge of whether that's sufficient mitigation to the impact to agriculture, to the loss of almost 400 acres of farmland. I think the point is right that it doesn't, and certainly the Montana Supreme Court would uphold against that denial of this because it didn't mitigate that. The other way, you can see that this is a subdivision, not just the loss of farmland within its own boundaries, but is a bit of a leapfrog development, and it's going to impose impacts on adjacent farms and ranches. Well, impacts, they required a 4-foot fence and notification of proximity to agricultural operations. So when somebody buys their home inside subdivision, one of the 550 families that buys a home in here, they're going to get a notification that, hey, by the way, you're near other farms, you're near farms and ranches, just to let you know. So that was, according to the Raleigh County Commissioners, sufficient mitigation to the impacts to agriculture. On the next example here, a recent subdivision. Again, this development not at a standstill anymore. We're starting to see it come back. Also 2011. This is Missoula County. You can see subdivision that's just north of Lolo, Montana. And different colors on this map show agricultural soils. So the red is prime farmland if irrigated. The is farmland of statewide importance. And the yellow is farmland of local importance. As you can see within this subdivision, it's mostly red. It's mostly all the best farmland we've got in Missoula County, prime if irrigated. 116 acres that were all converted to 5-acre residential lots. The Planning Board voted unanimously 6-0 to recommend denial to the Missoula Commissioners. The County Commissioners voted unanimously to approve the subdivision. And why, at the end of the day, did they decide to approve it? I would argue that it doesn't seem to be the political will or the complete understanding of the Montana Subdivision and Platting Act. They still didn't feel like they had the authority to deny it just based on the impacts to agriculture alone. And so we're working hard to change that in Missoula County, and I would say we've made a lot of progress. Of the 30 subdivisions that we've reviewed, each of them has been an educational opportunity for them, and we've actually gotten to the point where we're having a pretty broad community discussion and a pretty contentious one at that to actually do something about it. There are two negative examples where there's lacking political will and a lack of understanding of the law. And on to positive examples here. One, we're still in Missoula County. You can see the division this is Blue Heron Estates. It's west of town, also all on prime farmland. 75 acres. And, the first proposal was to convert it into 15 5-acre residential lots, and you can see it's a nice cookie cutter subdivision. It's pretty much what we see, I think, in Missouri. I think from what I've seen in a lot of places in Montana, a very uncreative, just cut up into residential lots. Well, in this case, we remember that flow chart of how a subdivision becomes a subdivision. In our agency review comments, we suggest that that the impacts to agriculture in this subdivision design were not sufficiently mitigated because it would result in a permanent loss of farmland. So we made recommendations to the developer. As always, we say, hey, we would love to work with you. If we can help you come to a better subdivision design, our door is open. Well, in this case, the developer took us up on our offer, and he sat down at the table with us, and we were able to come up with an entirely new subdivision. This is before it even got to the governing body. Instead of doing 15 5-acre lots covering every of the farmland, doing 15 1.4-acre lots totaling about 23 acres. And then there's the green area is 30 acres of farmland that's permanently protected. And the blue is 2 acres of riparian habitat that's also permanently protected. So you can see that when we talk about land use planning and the importance of protecting farmland, we're really looking for, in this case, better subdivision designs. It's not necessarily an either or. It's about using state law and our local planning to make sure that subdivisions are better. Is this a loss of farmland? Yes, but it's a heck of a lot better than losing every square inch of it. So, we would say that this sufficiently mitigated the impacts to agriculture. The last example, I wasn't able to find the exact location of this subdivision, but from the newspaper article, Greyhawk Ranch Estates, maybe some of you from Gallatin County that might be out there can tell me if I'm right or wrong on this, but I believe the Greyhawk ranch estates was somewhere in here, 85 acres of farmland. It was a 5-lot subdivision proposed on these 85 acres. The lots would have been between 13 and 18 acres in size. So again, just kind of pretty carving up the entire farm into little sheds. And the commissioners, the Gallatin County commissioners, were concerned about the loss of farmland as well as the leapfrog effect. You can see 4 corners over here on the right, and you know the subdivision's out pretty far from their services, and so you know they were concerned that not only would they lose farmland within the 85 acres itself that would be cut up, but it would put undue development pressure on the surrounding farms and ranches. So they cited the Montana Subdivision and Platting Act, particularly the impacts to agriculture, and voted to do the subdivision. And this was back in 2007, and they were able to successfully deny that subdivision. So just a few examples of how, of looking at the Montana Subdivision and Platting Act in our communities. There's lots we can do, and we're going to talk about that in upcoming webinars. What more can we do in our communities to better for working farms and ranches? But there is a state law that's already in place that we can use, and largely through education and outreach of that law. Sure.
Okay. Well, we do have a couple really good questions, and so I'll just real quickly, so we get this in before the end, remind you of the upcoming webinars in March. We're going to have one well, they're 2 weeks. 2 weeks from the next one, and then 2 weeks after that, we'll have the final one. And I just want to reiterate that this ranges on your stories. So please share what you've done in your communities with me as soon as you can, and this way maybe you can share at the next webinar. And then for the last one, similarly, if you've worked on specific policy, whether it was successful or not, that planned for working farms and ranches, please let us know so we can share stories. And with that, I think we'll go ahead, and there have been a couple of questions posed to us. And
while we're on the webinars real quick, one of the reasons why I wanted to speak about subdivisions outside of Missoula County and Ravalli County and in Gallatin County was to show you it's much better for you to tell your story than for me to. So I can see things going on in Missoula County, but I really want you guys to tell stories to others from what's happening in your communities. So we really hope that you will get in touch with us about participating in the next webinar as a presenter.
Okay. So this is Sarah Fallon, and we're gonna sort of start at the last questions, and the questions address what we most recently discussed, and we'll move our way back in time. The first question was, could you talk about what's in the state rule, or the last question? Anyway, not just the state law. And really what we have is a state law that gives authority with certain restrictions to local government. So we don't really have state regulations that apply to subdivisions. We have local regulations that are governed by or have to cover certain things as set forth by the state law. So we don't really have state rules that apply other than the law itself. Another comment was that we need legislation requiring county commissioners to enroll in a week-long class to totally learn about the Montana Subdivision Act. Absolutely, I agree. My guess is that won't happen, and the fact is the county commissioners do indeed have attorneys who are dedicated to help them understand and implement the Subdivision Act. So this goes to the question of political will. This actually gets to the next question as well, which was about developers suing counties and county commissioners saying that that's why they are not going to deny a division because of its impacts on agriculture or wildlife, water, things like that, is because developers will sue and developers will win. And so I think this education fits into both of those things. My experience has actually been that, for example, recently I worked with a group out the Blackfoot that helped Missoula County defend a decision that denied a subdivision because of its impacts on wildlife and wildlife habitat. There's actually now 2 different lawsuits, and the county prevailed on that at the Montana Supreme Court level. So it's not really true that commissioners lose when the developers sue, but the fact is developers do sue, and that's scary. And so I think as much as anything, it's a fear of being sued. And the fact is most local groups, citizens, local farmers who are concerned about this don't have the resources to sue the commissioners when they don't make a decision protective of agriculture or wildlife or whatever the impact is that you're most concerned about. And the developers do have those resources, and they do sue. So that the commissioners will lose is that they'll be sued.
And if I can, that's right on the money. We hear that all the time. And frankly, listen, I don't want my local government to waste money fighting lawsuits that it will lose. But what we need to do is stand up for the community interest as well, and make sure that's at least balanced with individual interests. And the way that's going to happen is they're hearing from people in their communities, if they're hearing from their constituents, then start to say, well, if I can legally do this, if I am sued, then I'm going to fight for my community because my community is asking me to. My kids actually showing up to public hearings and telling me what matters to them. And so I think one of the best things we can do, well, I think the suggestion of having a class for commissioners to really understand what their legal obligation is to ensure that communities' interests are defended. I don't think that's going to happen, and so one of the best alternatives to that is the ongoing education of showing up for public hearings and being very clear with the facts and speaking directly to the impacts to agriculture and look them in the eye and saying this subdivision would have X impact on agriculture. You know, whether it's the loss of farmland, whether it's a development next to an adjacent working farm, and speaking to the tangible impacts, and looking in the eye and saying you have the obligation to make sure this impact is mitigated, and if it's not mitigated, you need to deny it.
Right.
What is used to determine the extent of impact a subdivision has on farmland? That's a good question, and what we can do, we've been reviewing subdivisions since 2008, and just kind of started off a little bit, walking through what we thought were the most salient facts, and then quickly developed kind of a rubric, or in the questions language, kind of a matrix for measuring the impacts to agriculture. And we'd be happy to share that with anybody who wants to use it and adapt it to their community. So we'll make that available on our website.
Not missing anybody.
More questions about different issues.
Yeah.
Keep going down on the same topic.
So the question, the most common form of development, that defined term is defined by survey participants, come in the form of subdivisions, and what other types of developments exist? That's a good question. I think this is where it was specified. Survey participants did consider residential development. However, there were examples where this was commercial development, strip mall development, and that sort of thing. But yeah, mostly development refer to residential development.
The next question is, has someone selected the cases in which counties prevailed in lawsuits for denying subdivisions on ag land? And the answer to that question is no. first of all, citizens often do not get appealed to the Montana Supreme Court, and our district courts are not necessarily reporting, so it's harder to access all of the lawsuits, decisions that come out of the district court level. And I don't believe anybody's been tasked with doing that in any case. Very often, I would also add that when a county does deny a subdivision, they're going to find as many reasons as they possibly can. So they're probably not going to deny a subdivision on ag land issue alone if they have the opportunity to add in a bunch of other things as much as they can. But that doesn't mean somebody couldn't do it or work on it. The next question is, how about establishing a statewide legal defense fund that could be tapped into by affected citizens groups? As an attorney who's done a whole lot of pro bono work, I think that's an excellent idea. They are expensive. The lawsuits can be quite expensive, and it's a thing for a citizen group to dive into. And that has to be recognized. So,
that's an interesting suggestion. I did the first webinar of the Land Network, and I think it's really up to anybody who's participating to see what direction it'll go in. But there's a lot of great ideas, and that might be one that we look at doing if there was enough interest, and if that's what people determined what would be an appropriate source. Keep thinking about future projects that we can do to strengthen our collective efforts in our own communities. Setting a state precedent for defending one local government's decision to deny a subdivision that would just continue sprawl across farmland. That state precedent has huge implications for all the other counties, and so that's a good direction to be thinking about. Those ideas coming.
And I wanted to add that I think getting an attorney involved early on is a really good idea. Citizens are incredibly important. An attorney can help sort of identify what to really emphasize, can help sort of with that, the matrix that somebody had asked a question about, what kinds of facts should you be presenting to the local government in preparation, sort of both to convince them, but also in preparation for a suit if the subdivision is approved and everybody thinks it should have been denied based on the impacts and the information that you want to make sure you have in the record. An attorney can really set that up.
So 2 questions just came in about state legislature. One from Brendan Bozeman. Do we need to think in terms of sending sympathetic representatives to Helena? There is a law on the books. She was kidding, by the way. There is a law on the books, so is it necessary to create a critical mass to make the laws super serious? It's really essential that we get people in Helena who care about community and who care about agriculture and working farms. It was a nail biter. The next question on this was, what was the number for the bill that was defeated, and are more anti-ag bills in the next legislature? So these are 2 connected questions. Yes, we do need to be worried. That bill was House Bill 542. I'm a little bit worried. I actually remembered that number. But that was House Bill 542. And it made it through the House and the Senate. It squeaked by. Thanks to Montanans across the state, we were able to appeal 50. Every single Democrat voted against it, and 15 Republicans as well voted against it, and that empowered the governor to veto it. It gave him a veto-proof minority, but it even made it to his desk. It was a huge victory, and particularly in this legislature. We can definitely expect it's going to come back, and we don't know who's going to be in the governor's office. So we've got to send the right representatives to Helena, and we also need to be well organized now. And that's one of the outcomes, hopefully, of the Ag Land Network, is that we'll be that much better organized to make sure that the legislature doesn't go anywhere. The realtors have already said they're going to go back with it. So we expect the Montana Organization of Realtors to be right back fighting for sprawl and farmland, and so we'll be ready.
Yeah, we're just checking back for see if we got everyone's questions. Oh.
Funding incentives are being pursued to aid potential young farmers. That's a great question. I don't think it's not really in the scope of the AgLand network itself. So I think I'm going to leave that one alone for now. Could Move Fresh be made available for local showings? It probably could. That's something to look into. And if that's the kind of thing where, and actually this is where that other question is relevant, is when doing community outreach to bring it back to the land. So if you're going to show a movie in your community about like fresh and problems with the industrial food system and the solutions from a local response, then that's a good way to make a case for it, and we need the farmland here to do it. So Sarah's nudging me to talk about ManLink Montana and an incubator farm. That's not exactly a financial incentive to beginning farmers, but it's some of the work we're trying to do in Missoula County to support them in accessing land. On our website, you can read more about ManLink Montana. It's basically just a way to help facilitate the farm transition to beginning farmers. And some of you are familiar with the term incubator farm. It's just a place for beginning farmers to go and incubate a farm business, working often together, sharing resources like machinery, greenhouses, land, and then eventually spin their farm off to another property. So it looks like those are the main questions, and we're just about out of time. Please get in touch with us. Again, tell us the stories that you have that we might be able to work into future webinars. But also just know how we're doing here. This is about all of us work together. So let us know what works for you in this webinar, what was the most interesting, what you'd like to see in future webinars, how we can make it the webinars and the AgLand network itself most relevant to you and your local community. And we would really hear from you. Our email addresses, I'll type them here as well.
Go back to the beginning and.
So thanks so much for joining us today, and yeah, please get in touch and let us know. So we have a question: is the presentation available for download? We have recorded it, and we're going to try to do that. So hopefully all the technology works out, but we should be able to make the whole recording available for anybody who wants it, and if useful to you, then fantastic.
Thank you again.
Thanks, folks.